The day the council asked too much. They expected a handshake. They got silence. They expected compliance. They got a closed door. And when they asked humanity to kneel, humanity laughed. The convergence of power. Across the galaxy, stars pulsed in rhythm with political panic. The Galactic Conclave, the oldest and most powerful diplomatic body in the known universe, had summoned an emergency summit. Not because of a war, not because of a plague, but because of one species, humans, a species that a century ago had barely made it past their moon. Now, they held the attention and fear of every major power in the galaxy. And the reason was simple. They were the only species who said no to everything. The final treaty. It was called the Harmony Accords, a series of treaties drafted over 6 decades, signed by over 300 species. Trade, peacekeeping, shared technology, joint defense. It was the foundation of order in the galaxy. And when humanity was finally invited to sign, they refused. No edits, no compromises, just a firm, undeniable, "We will not." The room went still. Delegates from the Valorans, the Chantari, even the terrifying Skald Dominion, all stared at the Terran representative. Ambassador Lena Rourke sat calm, her eyes cold and clear. "We respect your rules," she said, "but we won't be bound by them." Galactic shockwaves. The response was instant. News networks across dozens of systems spun headlines. Humans defy the Conclave. Is Earth declaring war? Treaty collapse imminent. But it wasn't war. It was something worse. Unpredictability. The Conclave's strength wasn't built on fleets or weapons. It was built on cooperation, on the assumption that every species, no matter how strange, eventually played by the same rules. Until now, humanity was breaking a rule no one had written down. The rule that said, you must choose a side. Why did humanity say no? They had allies. They had trade routes. They had even shared tech. But when it came to the treaties, Earth rejected them all, because the fine print always said the same thing. You will fall in line when we tell you to. And humans? They don't fall in line. A private meeting and a threat. 3 days after Earth's refusal, a private meeting was called. 6 council leaders, 1 human ambassador. What was meant to be a diplomatic debrief turned into a confrontation. The Valoran chancellor leaned forward, his voice dripping with control. You must understand, we don't offer these treaties lightly. Lena didn't flinch. We don't refuse lightly. The Chantari queen interjected, her crystalline voice soft but sharp. If you won't sign, we can't protect you. And Lena simply smiled. We weren't asking for protection. The galaxy begins to fracture. Treaty after treaty, rejected. Every attempt at compromise, refused. Every sanction, ignored. And yet, Earth thrived, because humans didn't need permission. They weren't building an empire. They weren't invading. They weren't threatening. They were just free, and that made them dangerous. Desperation sets in. Behind closed doors, the whispers began. How do we control them? Can we isolate them? Should we remove them before they become a problem? But it was already too late, because humans didn't need the galaxy's approval. They had already earned its attention. And in a universe where everything was controlled, one unpredictable species was a threat to every balance of power. Unaligned but not alone. When Earth rejected the treaties, the assumption was that they'd be isolated. Trade would collapse. Allies would withdraw. Their influence would wither. Instead, the opposite happened. Smaller species, ones who had signed the treaties out of fear, not loyalty, began reaching out to Earth in private. The Uran clans, who had long suffered under peacekeeping terms enforced by the larger powers. The Xeric coalition, tired of contributing to council projects while their own worlds went hungry. The Byrek tribes, who had once ruled star systems, but were now reduced to strategic partners with no real voice. Earth listened. Earth traded. But Earth did not bind them with signatures or signatures. No terms. No tribute. No thrones. Just one sentence. You stand on your own, or not at all. The Council reacts and stumbles. The Conclave try to counter. They launched diplomatic envoys to every system Earth had touched. Promised new terms. Less restriction. More autonomy. But it was too late. Because the one thing Earth had given no one else was respect. Where the Council offered security, Earth offered dignity. And for many of the galaxy's smaller powers, that mattered more than warships ever could. The veiled threats begin. Behind closed doors, the tone shifted. The Skald Dominion, ancient and aggressive, grew louder in council meetings. If Earth refuses to join the peace, their warlord rasped. Then Earth chooses conflict. Others agreed. If humanity wouldn't cooperate, perhaps they could be contained. A blockade, a sanction web, maybe even a covert strike. But no one dared say the word war. Because the galaxy remembered what happened the last time someone fired first on a Terran vessel. The ghost of Reaper Station. 50 years ago, the Reaper Station incident had shocked the stars. A pirate fleet, armed and backed by a certain Council-aligned syndicate, intercepted a human colony convoy. 3 freighters, 1 light escort. By the time reinforcements arrived, the pirate fleet had been annihilated. Not destroyed, not routed, erased. No survivors. No wreckage larger than child's toy. The human escort, TSV Warden, had vanished afterward. Some said it had gone rogue. Others whispered it was a test. But the message was clear. Attack Earth at your own peril. The unbreakable doctrine. Earth didn't expand like other powers. They didn't annex worlds. They didn't terraform recklessly. They didn't impose culture. But they did one thing better than anyone else. They built loyalty, not with fear, not with contracts, but by doing exactly what no one else did. Leaving people the hell alone. You needed help? They helped. You betrayed them? They left. No drama. No lectures. No invasions. Just a single principle. We fight when we're cornered. And when we fight, we don't stop. The Council's panic becomes policy. By now, Earth had trade lanes in every quadrant. Unofficial alliances in dozens of systems. Cultural reach through media, technology, and education. Humanity had become the unofficial voice of independence. And the Conclave began to feel it. Worlds started voting against Council initiatives. Subsidies dried up. Fleets stalled at their own borders, unsure if their orders would be followed. It wasn't just power that was slipping. It was control. And for a council built on predictability and obedience, that was more terrifying than any war. A whisper that grew into a roar. It started as a joke, a phrase spoken in backrooms, in the shadows of dying stars and the halls of rising resistance. We're not with the council. We're with Earth. And slowly, every world that had felt voiceless started to speak again. A new alliance without signatures. They called it the Terran Accord, but there was no paperwork, no formal registry, no declarations, just systems that had said, we've had enough. We'll stand. We'll trade. We'll live. But we won't bow. And the galaxy, for the first time in 1,000 years, began to shift, cornered by independence. The Conclave had never been this fragile. Its structure, the treaties, the shared fleets, the synchronized economies, all of it was cracking, not from invasion, not from terror, but from something far more dangerous. Choice. Species were choosing to leave, choosing to trade without oversight, choosing to live without permission. And it all led back to one source. Earth. The Council votes and breaks itself. It was supposed to be a final, decisive meeting, a show of strength. The Emergency Conclave Directive 301. Bring Earth into compliance or remove them from the Galactic Order. The chamber pulsed with energy as the Chancellor of the Council stood before thousands. Humanity has benefited from our order without paying the price of peace. They defy our treaties, undermine our unity. This cannot stand. But her voice was not met with cheers. Instead, debate exploded. The Andari delegation walked out. The Zerat envoy called the directive authoritarian madness. The Othelan speaker simply said, "You don't control Earth. You're afraid of them." And then came a single, devastating announcement. We will not support military action against a sovereign world. The vote fails. The chamber splinters. Out of 327 member species, 84 abstained, 49 voted against, and dozens more simply refused to participate. The motion died, the unity shattered, and with that, The illusion of control collapsed. A threat behind closed doors. What diplomacy could not accomplish. Some believed coercion might. And so, a plan formed. Operation Compliance. A covert mission. Strike Earth's infrastructure. Disable its trade relays. Show them that defiance has consequences. The agents were elite. The tech was stealth grade. The timing was perfect, but the mission never reached Earth. They knew we were coming. 3 of the 6 ships were never heard from again. The other 3? Found adrift, crew unconscious, systems fried, orbiting a gas giant nowhere near Earth. An encrypted Terran data burst followed, sent to every major system. We don't sign treaties. We don't bend to threats. We don't forget. The next time you come openly, or don't come at all. The message is clear. Earth doesn't blink. After that, the Council fell silent. Because if humans knew about covert fleets before they launched, if they could turn ships back without firing a shot, then Earth had reached a level of readiness no one had predicted. No shields raised. No ultimatums returned. Just quiet vigilance. And an unspoken warning. Try us. Just once. The new order forms. All across the galaxy, systems began to form a new network. Unregistered. Unregulated. But growing fast. They didn't call themselves an empire. They didn't declare war. They just built, traded, defended each other quietly. And in the center of it all, Earth. Not as a ruler, not as a conqueror, but as a reminder that freedom didn't require permission. That peace didn't come from papers. It came from resolve. The Council tries one last time. The Chancellor sent a direct transmission to Earth. This time, no demands, no pressure. Just one question. Why do you refuse our treaties? Ambassador Lena Rourke's reply was broadcast on every major network. Because treaties are not peace. Because you write them in your language with your assumptions. Because you confuse submission with stability. Because every clause you write is another leash. We don't want leashes. We want respect. If you can't offer that, then you've answered your own question. The galaxy watches and waits. Some species cheered. Others panicked. But all of them listened. Because for the first time, a species had told the Council, no. And that meant the galaxy had to choose. Between old rules and a new voice. Between permission and power. Between fear and freedom. The cracks become a fracture. It started with silence. Then the withdrawals began. One by one, systems across the outer spirals disconnected their links to the Conclave's central network. They stopped reporting trade numbers. They stopped attending diplomatic calls. They stopped paying. It was a quiet rebellion. No fleets. No battles. But it was worse than war. It was irrelevance. The Conclave's greatest fear wasn't Earth's strength. It was that Earth had proven the Conclave was unnecessary. Fringe worlds find their voice. In the past, fringe civilizations, like the Eloi Ring tribes or the Naren Sun-Blooded, were considered too primitive, too unstable for representation. The Council had offered them support, which meant surveillance. Now, they didn't ask for permission. They aligned themselves with Earth's independent trade networks. They built mutual defense pacts, inspired by Terran doctrine, and they thrived. Why? Because Earth didn't come with overlords. It came with options. The vote that was never held. The Conclave attempted to reconvene. An emergency proposal. Reorganize the central authority. Modernize the charter. But when the time came to cast votes, less than half of the member species even showed up. The motion was never heard. The doors were never opened. The chamber, once the beating heart of galactic governance, sat in the dark, empty, ignored, forgotten. Earth's quiet triumph. And through it all, Earth never raised a single banner, never made demands, never crowned a leader of this new order. Because Earth didn't need a throne. It had influence, real living influence, built not on fear, but trust. They gave the galaxy what it had been quietly begging for, a chance to choose its future, to govern itself, to break from ancient, brittle chains. And in return, Earth earned loyalty the Council could never manufacture. A universe without a leash. The old model was dying. Centralized power, standardized culture, single-point decision-making. The future didn't belong to a council. It belonged to a network. a web of species and systems that talked directly, without needing a galactic babysitter to approve their every move. Earth didn't tell the galaxy how to live. It simply reminded them they could. The final recording. Years later, the last Chancellor of the Council recorded a message. It was never officially released, but it was leaked, of course. In it, she looked older, tired, but honest. We didn't fall because of war. We fell because someone offered a better way. Earth didn't conquer us. Earth exposed us. Our treaties were never peace. They were control. And when someone said no, we discovered how shallow our power really was. Earth never ruled, but everyone followed. They called it the Terran Shift, a time when sovereignty replaced compliance, when collaboration beat coercion, when freedom became contagious. Earth didn't ask to lead. It didn't pretend to be perfect, but it never signed a leash around its neck. And that, more than anything else, changed the galaxy forever. A new kind of leadership, without the Council's chokehold on governance. The galaxy didn't fall into chaos. It found its voice. In the absence of bureaucracy, worlds remembered what they were capable of. Trade didn't collapse. It flourished. Science didn't stall. It accelerated. And everywhere, the same pattern emerged. The species that had once depended on orders were now leading themselves. But they weren't alone, because at the center of this quiet revolution was Earth. Earth's influence without authority. They didn't call it an empire. There are no flags, no emperors, no legions marching across space. Yet Earth's signal reached farther than any conquest had ever spread. On the trade stations of the Nuren Drift, humans advised logistics, but never charged tribute. In the star farms of the Olin Nebula, Terran engineers helped triple harvest yield, then stepped aside. On war-torn moons where Council peacekeepers had once dictated law, Earth offered medical aid and left when they were asked. This was Earth's doctrine. Help, then let go. It didn't sound like strategy, but in a galaxy that had been told how to live for centuries, it was a revolution. The rise of the Accord worlds. They weren't colonies. They weren't allies in the formal sense, but they were everywhere. Worlds that had grown under Earth's influence, governed themselves, chose cooperation over coercion. They called themselves Accord worlds, not because Earth demanded it, but because they chose it. 1,000 variations, 1,000 voices, but one understanding. No one ruled them, but they weren't alone. The others tried to imitate. Some of the remaining powers tried to mimic Earth's success. The Zon Empire declared a new free trade initiative, but its tariffs were 4 times higher than Earth's. The Chantari hegemony allowed limited local voting, as long as those votes agreed with the High Speaker. The Shkal Dominion offered alliances, which came with security forces and surveillance satellites. The galaxy saw through them all, because Earth had offered the one thing no one else dared: a voice without a leash. Human culture becomes a weapon of peace. What Earth didn't win with fleets, they won with ideas. Music, stories, philosophies, beamed across space on unsecured frequencies. They weren't transmissions of dominance. They were invitations. And species responded, not because they were forced, but because they were heard. For every dictator who said, "Their freedom is dangerous," 10 young beings asked, "Then why does it feel like hope?" Whispers of a true new alliance. Across the Accord worlds, a new idea formed. Not just a peace, but of mutual defense. Not a council, not a government, just a network. If any world was attacked, all others would respond. Voluntarily. No signatures, just a promise. It had no name, no logo, but it was real. And when Earth was asked to lead it, they answered the only way they ever had. No, we don't want to lead. We'll stand with you, but you'll stand on your own. And so they did. What began as one world's refusal had become a galactic movement, a philosophy, a reminder that submission was not the price of survival. That peace could be earned without being purchased. And in the void where the Council once stood, a new order was born, not through declarations, not through domination, but through the quiet, contagious power of a single, dangerous word. No, peace never lasts forever. The stars have been quiet. Trade flourished. Wars faded into memory. The old conclave had withered. But peace is not the galaxy's default. And deep beyond the mapped sectors, past the reach of any relay, beyond where even explorers dare to chart, something moved. It had no name, no flag, no face, only hunger, the kind that didn't conquer, the kind that didn't even speak. It devoured, whole systems silenced, space itself bent and scarred behind its passing. Ships disappeared, planets went dark, and the old whispers returned. Something is coming. The fractured galaxy reacts. The remnants of the council argued. It's a fluke, natural disaster. Pirates. The Zon called it propaganda. The Chantari sent diplomats. None returned. The Shkal dismissed the threat, until 2 of their border moons vanished overnight. But Earth? Earth listened, because humans recognized the pattern. Not from this galaxy, from their own. They had fought extinction before. They knew what silence meant. They knew when it was time to stop debating and start preparing. The Accord worlds don't wait. No declarations. No call to arms. Just action. Supplies moved. Ships mobilized. Defense grids lit up across independent systems. Not because they were ordered to, because they knew they might be next. And leading the preparations? Not Earth alone, but the dozens of worlds Earth had once helped. Now helping each other. Some offered fleets, others tech. Some offered only people willing to fight. It didn't matter. They stood together. The others hesitate and begin to fall. The old powers scoffed until the darkness reached them. When the Chantari outer colonies vanished, they begged for assistance. When Zon supply lines were severed, they demanded answers. When Shkal strongholds burned silent, they turned to the only ones still standing. Earth and the Accord. Earth responds, but not as a savior. Ambassador Lena Rourke, now retired, returned for one last message. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity. When we said no to your treaties, you said we'd be alone. You were wrong. We said no to submission, not to unity, not to peace. We never rejected the galaxy, only the chains. And now that a real threat is here, we'll fight. Not for dominance, not for order, but because we remember what it's like to stand on the edge of extinction. And we swore never again, for us, or for anyone, a united stand on their own terms. For the first time, the galaxy faced annihilation, not under one flag, but together, different languages, different species, different beliefs, but united, not by a treaty, not by law, not by fear, by choice. And when the darkness came, humanity was already there, waiting, not to lead, not to conquer, but to fight, because that's what they'd always done. And this time, they weren't alone. The first contact with annihilation. The enemy wasn't like anything the galaxy had faced. No ultimatums, no negotiations, no demands. It didn't want territory. It didn't care about power. It simply erased. Whole systems gone, not destroyed. Not conquered, removed, from maps, from memories, from reality itself. The enemy devoured history, and no one could figure out how. Until Earth made contact, the Echo fleet arrives. The first major engagement was at Varnak's Point, a relay hub at the edge of known space, and the last warning system before the core territories. That warning came too late. The Accord world scrambled. Earth responded with the Echo fleet. Not their largest force, but the fastest to deploy, spearheaded by the Terran dreadnought TSV Harbinger. It was made to do one thing: survive the first strike. They arrived in a dead system. No signals, no heat, just the bones of 100 worlds. And then, the enemy appeared. They expected ships. They found something else. No hulls, no engines, just forms that shifted like space was their skin. They didn't fly through the void. They moved the void itself. Weapons fired. Missiles launched. Lasers cut across nothingness. No effect. But the Echo fleet didn't retreat. They adapted. Tracked patterns. Found resonance gaps. Microseconds when the enemy was tethered to reality. Earth Tech had one job: hold the enemy long enough to hit it. The first kill took everything. 6 ships sacrificed. 3 captains dead. 1 coordinated strike using frequency-locked warheads. The enemy screamed without sound, and for the first time, it died. A turning point. That single kill changed everything. Until then, the enemy had been myth, an unstoppable force, a death sentence. Now it could be fought, and a galaxy, terrified, fractured, desperate, rallied. Earth opened its defense protocols, shared data, shared tech, even shared command, but not to dominate, to survive. The alliance that was never signed. There was no central command, no high council, no binding votes. There was only the Accord network, and a promise. If one burns, all burn. So none will burn alone. The Nuran fleets formed the left flank. The Byrek cruisers guarded the rear. The Valorans, once council elite, now flew beside Terran carriers. And in the center, Earth's finest, pilots bred from chaos. Tacticians raised in uncertainty. Soldiers who knew what it meant to face extinction and still fight. The Sky War begins. The next battle was over Talia 4, an Accord world known for peaceful science and rich archives. The enemy came for its memory, but this time it met resistance. Real resistance. Thousands of ships, hundreds of formations, dozens of species. No banner, no anthem, just unified firepower and defiance. The enemy's form faltered, its grip on space weakened. And then, in one coordinated assault, the Terran warship TSV Dauntless dived into the heart of the enemy's distortion field and ignited a dimensional core. It burned through the silence, tore a hole in the void, and gave the others a shot. And they took it, all of them. Victory, but not the end. Talia 4 was saved. The enemy ripped apart, forced to retreat. But the cost? Hundreds dead, thousands wounded, a third of the fleet gone. And yet, the signal went out across the stars. We can win. It's not a myth. They bleed, and we can make them pay. The war changes. No more waiting. No more watching systems fall. Now the enemy was being hunted, not with fury, not with conquest, but with purpose. Because Earth had taught the galaxy something new. You don't need treaties to stand together. You need a reason. And survival? That was reason enough. Patterns in the silence. With every battle won, the Accord forces pushed deeper into the void, and the further they ventured, the stranger things became. There were ruins, but not like any ever recorded. Planets carved into symmetrical lattices, moons hollowed from within, structures made of materials that defied scanning, as if they refused to acknowledge physics. There were no names, no records, no languages, just traces. The shadows of civilizations that should have been remembered, but weren't. It was like finding footprints in dust. After centuries of silence, and Earth knew what they were seeing. Victims. Whole species erased before memory could take root. The archive of ghosts. One planet, designated Ural 7, held the answer, buried deep beneath its crust, under mountains of collapsed architecture. They found it. A vault. Sealed in a way that nothing else had been. Inside, they discovered a relic. Not a weapon, not a message, a memory, somehow preserved, somehow intact. A record from a species that no longer existed. Speaking in tones and glyphs long forgotten. Translated slowly by Terran AI systems. It took a month, and when it was finally understood, the room went silent. We saw it coming. It devoured our stars one by one. We built this vault not to survive, but to be remembered. If you find this, you are next. Do not beg it. Do not hide. Do not trust the silence. Fight or fade. Earth's greatest revelation. It wasn't just history. It was a warning that stretched across time itself. And it confirmed Earth's deepest fear. The enemy had been here before. It had destroyed civilizations before Earth was even born. It had wiped history clean more times than the stars could count. And no one had ever fought back long enough to be remembered. Until now, the network awakens. Earth didn't hoard the discovery. They broadcasted it to every Accord world, to every silent species still watching from the shadows. The footage, the language, the faces of the forgotten, shared freely, not as a scare tactic, not as propaganda, as proof. Proof that the threat was real. Proof that they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the memory of the lost. The galaxy watched, and something shifted, a war of purpose. The Accord wasn't just an alliance anymore. It had become a cause. Because for the first time, the galaxy wasn't fighting for power, or planets, or peace. It was fighting for remembrance, so that no one else would be forgotten, so that what was built would not be erased, so that the cycle would finally break. The enemy reacts, and the enemy felt it, felt the pain of being understood, felt the burn of resistance in the very places it had once been worshipped as untouchable. It began to fight harder, more direct, more violent, not erasing, not hiding, attacking, because it finally knew it was not alone. The erased had been remembered, and the living had found purpose in their memory. Earth's final strategy. Earth didn't change their weapons. They changed their message. Every ship in the fleet now carried the words of the vault. Painted, broadcasted, etched into hulls. Fight or fade. No longer a Terran mantra. Now a universal call. It didn't matter what planet you came from, what biology you had, what name your ancestors gave the stars. If you could fight, you stood. And if you stood, you were seen. And in this war, to be seen was to survive. The enemy was learning, so humanity had to adapt first. With every skirmish, the enemy changed. It grew smarter, more reactive. It began countering Earth's dimensional anchors, adapting to energy frequencies, disrupting command networks in milliseconds. This wasn't a mindless force anymore. It had begun to recognize humanity as a true threat, which meant time was running out. Humanity had opened the galaxy's eyes. But now came the final question. Could they finish what they started? Operation Unity. A plan was drafted, not by generals in isolation, but across hundreds of worlds. Dozens of species contributed strategy, tech, and knowledge. The Veliari provided anti-void resonance harmonics. The Byrek encoded viral memory shards into kinetic warheads. The Solarian monks of Earth's Europa colony created synchronized psilinks to resist psychic interference. The plan was simple in theory. Hit the heart of the enemy. Not a fleet, not a base, but the origin node, the source of its presence in this reality. But to do that, they had to find it. The Deep Strike, a probe launched from the edge of reality, wrapped in psionic shielding, carried by a ship without a name, discovered something, a fold in space, a tier where nothing should have existed, and beyond it, a structure, not made of matter, not even of energy. It was made of memory, of all that had been erased, an impossible construct, built from everything the enemy had consumed. If Earth could reach it, destroy it, they wouldn't just win the war. They'd release every lost civilization from oblivion. They'd give history back to the stars. The Unity Armada forms. It had no flag, no anthem, but every ship that jumped that day carried the words etched in Terran steel. We fight or fade. Hundreds of species, thousands of ships, every Accord world, even the remnants of the old Council. Because now it wasn't about Earth. It was about everyone. And if they failed here, there would be no second chance. The battle beyond the veil. When the Unity fleet arrived, space itself screamed. The enemy tried to stop them before they crossed the threshold. Folds of anti-reality collapsed in waves. Ships blinked out of space and never returned. But the fleet pushed forward. Earth's dreadnoughts led the vanguard. Veliari skimmers lanced through collapsing vectors. Byrek assault pods crashed into spectral barriers. And then they reached it, the core, a storm of memory and entropy, a swirling monolith of every civilization the enemy had devoured. It pulsed with ancient power, but for the first time in eons, it was exposed and vulnerable. The final push. Every ship fired, every mind focused, every voice screamed in defiance. Earth's superweapon, Project Ashwake, detonated in the center of the core. A dimensional burn, not to destroy, but to force the core to remember everything it had erased. Thousands of years of history, restored in an instant. The core began to fracture. The enemy cried out, not in sound, but in raw psychic terror, because for the first time, it had lost control. And then, the TSV Valiant, humanity's oldest ship still in service. piloted manually by a 96-year-old war veteran named Commander Osei Yilmaz, drove itself into the collapsing core. Final transmission. For those you silenced, for those you try to forget, this one's for all of us. And with that, the core shattered. The silence ends. All across the galaxy, stars pulsed brighter. The distortion storms vanished. Ships once lost returned. Planets erased flickered into existence. And in orbit around Earth, a satellite long thought destroyed, pinged back to life. A single message. The sky remembers. The war was over, but the galaxy was changed forever. The core had been destroyed. The enemy, an ancient, unfathomable force, was gone. Not just beaten, unwritten, its influence dissolved, its silence shattered, its erasure undone. Ruins long lost now had names. Extinct species returned to the archives. Star systems forgotten by time were once again mapped by those who descended from them. The galaxy had survived, but more than that, it remembered. A new order forged without chains. There was no cheering in the ruins, no fireworks, no imperial speeches, just rebuilding, healing, remembering, and something even more radical: trust. For the first time in recorded galactic history, species were cooperating without force, without oversight, without the old hierarchy. Trade agreements were local, defense pacts were voluntary, communication relays were shared, because no one wanted to go back to the days of false order and empty peace. Earth remained what it always was: unaligned, independent, unconquered, but not alone. Their people were seen not as rulers, but as the ones who said no, until saying yes meant something again. They didn't form a council. They didn't rewrite the old charter. Instead, they proposed something else. A single page, a new treaty, written in the simplest of terms. The Accord of Memory. It was signed on a neutral world. Not Earth, not a capital, just a place where every species had suffered and survived. No banners, no military parades, just representatives, and the ghosts of those who never had the chance to be heard. The treaty was short, just 3 sentences. No species shall be erased. No memory shall be silenced. No freedom shall be given, only chosen. There were no punishments written into it, no enforcement mechanisms, because the entire galaxy now understood. If you had to be forced to do the right thing, you were already part of the problem. Earth signed at last. It was symbolic, intentional. They had been the first to refuse. Now, they were the last to agree. When Ambassador Lena Rourke placed her signature on the final line, she looked out at the gathered species and said, "We still don't want your chains, but we'll wear your memory, and we'll protect it like it's our own." There was no applause, only silence. The good kind. The kind left behind after something sacred is rebuilt. A legacy beyond power. The Terran Alliance never became an empire. Its fleet never became a galactic police force. Its people never demanded tribute. But their legacy? It was written in every rebuilt library. Every child who learned about the galaxy as it was, and as it had been. Every small world that knew it could now speak without fear. Because Earth had reminded the stars of something forgotten. That dignity isn't granted. It's claimed and defended by anyone brave enough to say, no. Final transmission. Years later, from a relay station orbiting the once-erased world of Ural 7, a broadcast was sent out across the stars. It was encoded in hundreds of languages, but the message was simple. We remember now, and as long as we do, nothing is ever truly lost. Let them come again, whoever they are. This time, they'll face all of us.